Coordinator, eminent speaker, and dear participants. Good morning, and I welcome you all to the session 9 on the day 4 of this faculty development program. The lecture that will be delivered is entitled as Bio Waste for Energy Efficient Memory Design, and it will be delivered by Dr. Soumya Jyoti Ray. Dr. Ray has pursued his PhD from University of St. Andrews, UK, and worked as a research scientist in CEA Grenoble, France, and Technical University Darmstadt, Germany thereafter. His current research group at IIT Patna works in the area of nanoelectronics, spintronics, bioelectronics, and energy, which gets covered frequently in high impact journals. Currently, he is serving as a PhD coordinator. He has received DST Early Career Research Award, DST Inspired Faculty Award, and Research Excellence Grant Award by European Metrology Research Program in the recent times. He has been included in the list of top 2% scientists in the world by Stanford University, USA. He had delivered lectures at Cambridge, Oxford, College London, Leeds, Glasgow, Paul Scher Institute, University of Twente, Helmholtz Zentrum, Berlin, and Max Planck Institute for Microstructure Physics, HAL Max Planck Institute for Core Research, Germany. We welcome you, Dr. Ray, and you are allowed to take over the session. Kindly proceed.
Okay, good morning, and thank you, madam, for the nice introduction. And welcome to this session. Now I'll share my PPT. And,
good morning, Dr. Ray.
Thank you. Good morning. Okay, so is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Okay, so shall I start?
Yes, please. Kindly make it full screen.
Yeah. Sure. Okay, so good morning everyone, and welcome to all the participants for attending this session, and thanks to madam for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts basically on this topic in this FDP program. So the topic of today's discussion is bio waste for energy efficient memory design. And here the idea is that basically we are trying to design some sort of memory components. So these are mostly let's say RAM or random access memory, which can store data. And here if we can use some of these biological materials which usually are not actively kind of used in that sense, let's say we throw away things, some sort of waste material, and if we can use that as an active component to design some of these memory elements. So that is the idea of the discussion. So I'll basically first try to discuss a little bit on the electronics part, like how does the electronic circuit evolution is working and where this particular theme fits in there. And towards the end, I will discuss some of the results. So that is the idea. So I'll also discuss some of the mechanism also, like how does these memory devices work and things like that. Okay, so here is a brief kind of like guideline of the contents. So I'll start with electronics, and then I'll talk about bioelectronics. And basically this is a theme which comes under bioelectronics. So we'll basically go under that name. And this particular area where we will be focusing will be RRAM, that is resistive random access memory. And we'll kind of go into the detailed discussion onto that. Okay. Now, since the theme of this workshop is sustainability, so let us see where does this particular topic fits in. So as we know that there is a big amount of greenhouse gas emission that is happening from different, let's say, like power plants. So till now we have almost 63 to 65% of the energy that is consumed by us is contributed by basically fossil fuel burning. So it's like either coal or petroleum or things like that that is being used to produce the electricity. It's almost 63 to 65% of the total amount. And constantly that is producing a lot of greenhouse gases, and essentially we are kind of polluting the atmosphere and also increasing the global temperature, which is of course a big concern for us. Now, on the other hand, there is a lot of wastage that is being produced also. For example, you can see this figure on the right hand side. So I'll try to go to this marker option, laser pointer. Okay, so here on the right hand side, you can see in this figure that this is probably a waste dump where lots of plastics and other things are being dumped into some area. Now, as we know that this plastic and these kinds of materials are not something which essentially degrades into our Mother Earth. So over a period of time, the amount of waste that will be accumulated is quite huge, and essentially they will also lead to quite a lot of pollution and other problems. So we are trying to move towards a much more kind of cleaner or green, or let's say sustainable kind of economy and solutions, or let's say lifestyle. So for example, the energy that we are consuming is trying to be replaced by the alternative, or let's say less polluting sources of energy like solar energy, or let's say from some of the biofuels. And we're also trying to recycle more and more of the let's say plastic or glasses which we are basically using. Now here a lot of this waste is also electronic waste, because these days we all have mobile phones, tablets, laptops and everything, and let's say every 2-3 years people change their mobile phones and things like that. So there is a lot of these electronic waste which also gets accumulated, and essentially they also contribute towards this kind of electronic dump. Okay, and there is as such not any successful recycling strategy which is existing. So there are some ways people are trying, but still it's quite expensive. So one of the solution to kind of reduce the waste generation is to use some of these biological materials or let's say organic materials which can degrade easily into our earth, so that they do not actively contribute towards the pollution. Okay, so that way this bioelectronics could be a sustainable solution in the electronic industry also. As we know that in our day-to-day life, there are many kind of like electronic components which we are using. For example, starting from pen drive, then we have registers, compact disc, transistor, printer, laptop, and everything. So there are various applications where electronic components are actively or passively being used in our day-to-day life. And now here these components can be branched into different kind of parts of the electronics. For example, we have digital electronics, then we have analog electronics, then optoelectronics, power electronics, and bioelectronics is also a new branch which has come under this umbrella. And here there are also different circuits and devices which are being made up, and that is kind of is a booming industry which is going to contribute a lot into this platform. Now, let us first look at what are some of the limitations that are existing with the conventional electronic devices. So one of the main problem with the existing electronic industry is that there is a miniaturization problem. And the second problem is the power consumption and low efficiency. And of course, there is a cost problem, and things are not eco-friendly. So if we want to look into this thing into details, so let us first look at this picture. So look at this figure. So this is basically a motherboard of any of our, let's say, mobile phone or laptop. So here we have like some sort of integrated circuits, and that essentially is made up of let's say millions of transistors. Okay, very small transistors which are basically being part of these circuits. Now here is a graph which is basically showing us that the number of transistors that are being used in making these electronic circuits and how it has changed over the period of, let's say, last 50 years. So here is a law that is kind of an empirical law which was proposed by Professor Gordon Moore, who is also a co-founder of Intel. So he proposed this law that every 18 months the number of transistors is being doubled in a kind of like electronic chip. Okay, so here also if we look at that, starting from 1970, the number of transistors have increased by quite a large number, and this trend is always upward. And if we also look at into a little bit of the details, then we see that from 1970 to let's say until 2000, the number of chips which are available in the market, they are not that many in number compared to what has been produced after 2000 to 2020. So let's say in the last 20 years, the number of electronic chips or let's say circuits that have been actively used in the electronic industry are quite large in numbers. For example, here you can see these Apple chips, then we have AMD and basically IBM, etc. Now, in 1970, this number of transistors were in few thousands, but now it is in billions. Okay, so there is a huge number increase in the transistors, and that is basically because the size of the transistors has been reduced. So if we look at this graph, then we can see this thing, that this is the feature size. So we can think of this number as like an active dimension of a transistor. So this number used to be of the order of 10 micrometer in 1970, and then it is going down over the years, and now it is almost close to 10 nanometer. So there is almost like 10 to the power 3 times decrease in this number, and as a result, this transistor density has increased actually. So far so good, that we are getting more and more transistors, which is essentially adding up to the computational speed or operational speed. For example, let's say whenever we are buying a new model of mobile phone, we are getting let's say a higher specification. Like these days we have like 6 GB, 12 GB of RAM in a cell phone. While if you think of like probably 10 years back, people used to have only 512 megabyte of RAM in a computer itself. Okay, so this is possible because this feature size is essentially reduced, and one can make compact electronic devices, or let's say these components, with much higher computational power, which can be fitted into these portable devices. So this is a very good kind of kind of like, let's say, development of this technology. But now here there is a problem, not actually problem, but there is a change which has happened, that if you look at this number 100 nanometer, that as soon as this feature size is going below this number, then essentially the way these circuits behave, they change, because here quantum mechanical features, or let's say quantum mechanics, it starts becoming more and more prominent. So when it was above, let's say 100 nanometer, let's say in micrometer, then classical laws are kind of used to govern like how current will flow at certain voltage or etc. But here quantum mechanical features are becoming more and more prominent, and as a result the circuits also behave in a different way. Okay, so now essentially we are kind of hitting in kind of benchmark where these scaling, or let's say the reduction in the feature size, is going to be a very difficult exercise, because when we are at a length scale of the order of, let's say, 10 nanometer or let's say 5 nanometer, that means we are talking about, let's say, 10-20 atoms. Okay, so now we cannot of course go beyond that limit. So essentially we cannot reduce the device dimensions any further beyond certain limit. So essentially there is a genuine need for alternative technology where kind of like this scaling can be kept alive, and also at the same time the speed and let's say the memory size, that can be increased also. So there are alternative solutions which people are looking for, and one of the active areas where this can be done is through the use of biomaterials. Okay, so that's why we say that this is a boon of modern technology. Now let us see what are the present applications of bioelectronics? So it is still a very kind of like a relatively new technology, and in let's say next 10 to 15 years there will be quite a lot of development in this. So right now there are biosensors which are developed and they're used for disease treatment. For example, let's say if somebody has a local kind of like a problem, then some amount of like let's say chips or some sensing element can be used there to monitor the development of the disease, or let's say some sort of healing can be done on that. So here basically, let's say if we know the target of the disease, then some signals can be monitored through a device. So this will give us a kind of real life monitoring of the problem, and which will help to cure it more accurately. Then there are basically photoelectrochemical sensing. So this is also electrochemical sensing, which is photon based, and this is also some biological, let's say biomolecule based biosensors can be used for doing that. Then we have drug delivery, where essentially this will be kind of like a localized delivery of certain drugs, and that will kind of locally heal different let's say problems. And the fourth one, which we'll be talking today into quite a lot of details, is memory storage device. So here essentially we'll show how different biological waste materials can be used in order to design certain electronic circuits which can be used for different applications. So it will be memory and it can be computing, etc. Okay, so right now, if we look at the area of bioelectronics, so there are, this is kind of the pie chart in the left hand side, where you can see how different countries are actively involved. So you can see most of these European countries and USA, they are contributing itself more than 60% in this. So you can clearly understand the reason behind this interest. So European countries are itself contributing 43% and US is 20%, while Asia is mostly India and China. We are contributing around 23% into this. So there is quite a lot of interest into this. And if we look at the distribution of this, let's say, output of this research into different form of different publications, etc., in different subtopics. So there are different areas like biomaterials. So in the area of materials, 29% of the output is coming up. Then we have biochemical or biosurface science, there 15% is coming, and there are sensors, biomeasurement, bioelectronics, then biological FET, field effect transistors, then bioelectronic instrumentation, where this is basically coming under the measurement perspective. So here also quite a big fraction is coming up from here. So a lot amount of focus is coming into this electronic parts, where basically alternative circuits and different applications are kind of being designed here. Now, if we look at that, so today we'll be talking about some of this memory design part. So let us see what is the current status of memory. So as we know that in our phones and laptops, we have this RAM, that is random access memory, where locally the data is stored for, let's say, a short amount of time, and unless we kind of decide to store it permanently on the hard disk or things like that. So this is quite a important component in any computing operation, because this kind of works like a middleman. Okay, and if we look at the development of this memory technology over the years, then we can see the bandwidth, which is, let's say, the memory speed also, you can say that is gigabyte per Siemens. So here, let's say from 2000 onwards, this trend is quite upward, and you can say almost it is exponentially growing. So we have DDR, then DDR2, DDR3, and basically beyond DDR3 like DDR4 or something. So the clock frequency is increasing, of course. So you can see now we are almost going at hitting 3200 megahertz, but of course this is at 2012, so we are much higher number now. And the speed is also increasing as a result of that. So essentially, the speed is an important parameter, and also the memory rate, it is also quite important. Now, the reason why it is quite important is because there is a lot of interest in the present day on data-driven technologies, for example, big data. So where essentially lots of data that is being handled by different applications, for example, like healthcare, finance, travel, education, on everywhere basically. And these data are being analyzed and kind of used for different applications. Then we have here basically artificial intelligence, which is also again a data-driven technology. Then we have 5G that is also used to facilitate this kind of like data-driven architectures and Internet of Things. So all these data-driven technologies are in big demand nowadays. Now, in order to successfully implement these technologies, we need to have high speed of memory and also large memory transfer speed and storage capacity, etc. So that is why the memory, this random access memory, is a very important part, and the technology has to be developed in order to make sure that these technologies can work successfully. So now let us look at what are the existing memory devices into the market now. So here you can see there are several types of memory elements which have been kind of like categorized here. For example, SRAM, that is static random access memory. Then we have DRAM, that is dynamic random access memory. Then we have flash memory. Then STT-MRAM, that is spin transfer torque magnetic random access memory. And then we have PCRAM, that is phase change random access memory. Then FERAM, CBRAM, then oxide RRAM, etc. So very simply speaking, the way they work is not uniform, of course, across all the types. For example, let's say you can see in DRAM and this flash memory, there is some amount of silicon which is being used, and the parts are doped with either N+ types. So it's heavily doped at two ends, and there is either some amount of gate or some switching element which kind of initiates the memory storage. And then if we look at this MRAM, that is magnetic random access memory. So here this control is happening magnetically. For example, let's say here we have multiple magnetic layers. So this is anti-ferromagnetic layer. And then here we have, let's say, a ferromagnetic layer, and we have a non-magnetic layer. Then we have another ferromagnetic layer. So essentially what is being done here is that by using a small external magnetic field, the magnetic state of these different layers are controlled. So they are basically switched between either parallel, where both these arrows will be in the same direction, or in the anti-parallel, like they are in the opposite direction. So that way you can create different resistance states in the basically device, and that will allow you to pass a different amount of current, or let's say the resistance will be different, and as a result you can get a memory effect, and which you can actually one can use to store the data and also read the data in that way. Okay, and then if we look at in the bottom part, so there we can see, for example, this FERAM. So here we have a top and bottom electrode, and we have a ferroelectric layer which is connecting them. And if we apply a voltage, then as we know, this ferroelectric layer, they have some memory capacity. So the electric polarization which is being created here, so it has a non-zero spontaneous electric polarization. And if we kind of apply a voltage between these two, then either we can increase the polarization or we can decrease the polarization, which essentially can be used as a memory, or let's say for data storage, etc. And then here we have these last two parts, where basically we have some amount of filament which is being kind of like formed between this top and bottom electrode. So I'll explain this thing into details into the later part. So essentially what happens is that we have some this top and bottom electrode, which are metallic electrodes, and some amount of oxygen vacancies are being created, and these vacancies will align in order to create a filament, or let's say break a filament. So essentially it will be either high conducting path or it will be a low conducting path, and that way again some memory effect will be created here. So there are different mechanisms which are being kind of like in use, and they have different like several advantages, disadvantages. And here we will be focusing on this part, basically this RRAM part. Now this is specifically quite useful because it has a very simple operation, and industrially it is being observed that it can actually offer quite a sustainable solution actually. So now let us see how do this oxide, this RDAM thing work. So it actually works on the basis of something what is called as resistive switching. Okay, so now what is this process, resistive switching? So very simply speaking, it can be explained through this structure. So suppose we have a trilayer structure that you have a metal and an insulator and another metal. And if we basically apply a bias between these two electrodes and if we measure the current, then actually we can get this kind of a current voltage behavior. So for example, when we are starting from 0 voltage and then we are increasing it, then current will slowly increase almost linearly up to a certain amount, and then it will kind of increase very rapidly. So the resistance of the device will suddenly drop down, and the current that is flowing will be quite high here. So this is called as a set state, and the current that is being flown at this stage is basically limited. Now if we keep continuing this, so let's say we have reached the set state and then we are reducing the voltage, and after a point, if we go along this path, then we see that the amount of current that is being flown will be reduced. So essentially the resistance will increase and we will reach a low resistance state. So yeah, so basically from the low resistance state we are basically going to a high resistance state here. And if we keep on continuing, then along this blue line we can see that the basically current is being reduced, and if we kind of reverse the polarity, then current will again increase. And if we go along this path again, then there will be a reset operation where basically the high current which was being flown, that will be disturbed and the resistance will increase, and the system will come back to its original state. So here overall, if we look at the complete cycle, then we see that there is an hysteresis in this current voltage behavior. And if we kind of like do this operation over a number of cycles, then we can actually see that if this kind of trend is reproducible or not. So essentially here the resistance of the device is being switched between two states, that is set state and the reset state. And as a result, this process is called as resistive switching. And here this can be used actually for memory application. So if we look at that, why, I mean, what is the mechanism behind this? Then actually we'll see that, but let's look at first that what is the current state of the art into this technology. So there is this pyramid where you can see there are this volatile memory and there are non-volatile memory. So non-volatile means which is kind of permanent, which will not be erased, and then volatile is something which will kind of like be erased after a certain point. So you can see that if we increase the amount of memory, then or the size of the memory, that can be increased, but that there will be a speed limitation. So mostly if we are using a non-volatile memory, like what I just explained, that in resistive switching or let's say these RDAM devices, so there the memory size will be quite large, but the speed will be of the order of, let's say, milliseconds. So it is not too small, but if we want to have a higher speed, then basically the size of memory will be quite small, but the cost will also go on quite large. Okay, so here in the case of volatile memory, the speed will be moderate, but the memory size or storage capacity will be quite large here. So the cost will also be low here. So that is an advantage of this. And if we look at the recent trend of these memory devices, which are resistive switching based, then we can see the storage capacity is kind of hitting quite high, close to, let's say, 1 terabyte. So like Micron and then Samsung, they are developed like over 1 terabyte. of memory, and there are basically different kind of like so this is a data which has been taken up 2017. So in past 4 years things have probably gone up a little bit, but there are different types, and you can see there are quite a lot of candidates here, and the memory are also quite large here. So basically this is being used and the performance is also significantly good here. Now another application of this kind of restive switching based RDM devices is in neuromorphic computing. So probably you have heard of this thing, or some of you are familiar with this. So essentially what this is a next generation computing, which is kind of in very much interest in the present context. So the idea here is that the conventional computing which is being done now, that is kind of trying to be replaced by a neuromorphic based action. So where the neural functionality, or let's say the way our brain or neurons function, the similar kind of functionality is kind of trying to be reproduced into this operation. So very simply, if we think of, so there are these like neurons which have basically two ends that are like axon and dendron, and they are connecting through the next neuron, and there are these synapses which are kind of connecting them, and they are basically the parts through which information is being processed. And a similar kind of circuitry can be made with these RDM devices. So here this is a very simple kind of arrangement where you can see there is a crossbar kind of geometry. So there are this red and this blue arrays, and here there are different junctions which are basically these RDM cells, and one can actually use them basically for giving certain inputs and producing certain outputs, and they can perform different let's say computing operations which are basically mimicking the neuromorphic computing operation also. So there are quite a lot of work that is going on, and essentially there is a big interest into this area. And if we look at very simply, as I just said, that in this computing basically we have a cell body, and through which you have this axon and synapses, and the signal is being passed. And essentially if we want to reproduce this, then we will have some amount of this kind of like RDM circuit, so which will act as this neuron cell body, and then we have synapse, and then there are receiving neurons through which the information is being passed. Okay, so I mean, one can actually also design much complicated circuits, but this is a very simple one which can actually explain some of the basic things. And essentially, one can actually try to produce, or let's say, mimic a neural network here. So essentially here, so this is again a very popular picture probably, that you have, let's say, certain input variables, and they carry certain weight, and then you have the output y, and basically here if we want to mimic, or let's say do this operation through a neural network, then we can have input layer and several hidden layers which will carry certain weightage, and they will process it, and then we can get the desired output, and we can see that what is the accuracy of this process. So that is basically the basic idea behind this. So here these RDM based devices, or let's say these memories, they can be actually used and designed in order to do this neuromorphic computation or this kind of operations. Now let us look at the mechanism. So if you remember that I just explained that IV graph. So here basically we will understand why such kind of a memory effect is generating here. So let's say we are starting with a trilayered structure. So we have a top electrode and a bottom electrode, and then this is the initial state, which means that there is no voltage that is being applied. And let's say if this top electrode is at a positive bias with respect to the bottom electrode, then what happens is that usually this layer is an, let's say, insulating layer. So typically if it's an oxide layer, let's say in that way, so there will be some oxygen vacancies which will be created, and they will kind of create a conduction path. So there will be conducting filament which will be created, which will connect this bottom and top electrode, and that way the basically carriers or electrons can flow very easily between the electrodes, and as a result the current will start increasing, so it will reach a basically low resistance state. So this is the set state. Now if we reverse the voltage, so this is also called as this forming part, where these filaments are being formed, and if we reverse the voltage, then these filaments will be broken and we will go to the reset state. Okay, so essentially the conduction will go through a much more insulating or high resistive path, so current will essentially decrease. And then if we recycle this thing, then it will again reach this part where the current will be quite high. So the filament formation and filament breaking, they are essentially controlling the high and low current state, or basically we'll observe the high and low current state here through this part basically. Okay, so now these types of memory elements, or these resistive switching based memories, they can be classified into several types. So there are basically non-volatile memories or resistive switching, and then there is volatile type. And then non-volatile can be again categorized into unipolar and bipolar, and volatile can also be classified into two types, which will be threshold and complementary. So we'll look into this. So for example, we start with non-volatile one. So here, this is the unipolar resistive switching. So here you see that essentially here, if we are starting at, let's say, 0 voltage condition, and then if you're increasing the current, so let's say we are going along any of these, either the blue line or the red line, so the set operation happens along this blue arrow and the reset happens along the red arrow. But whatever is the case, so set and reset both, they are basically being done into one type of voltage. So the polarity of the voltage need not to be changed. So here, if it is a positive voltage, then as long we do not need to switch the voltage. So if you remember that earlier we have showed that we have to go to positive to negative voltage in order to switch the resistance state. But here it will be at a positive voltage where it will reach the set state, and it will reach the reset state also at a slightly lesser positive voltage. And the same operation can be reproduced in by applying a negative voltage also. So essentially these parts, so by applying only one type of polarity of the voltage, we can do the switching operation. So that is why it is called as a unipolar resistive switching. Now if we look at the bipolar, so here basically we need to have two different polarity of the applied voltage in order to complete a total resistive switching operation. So for example, here on the left side you can see the blue arrow is indicating the set process. So we are starting from a very low current and then we are increasing it, and after the set operation we are reaching the compliance, that means the high current state, let's say. And if we want to do the reset, then we have to go along this red path, so we have to apply negative voltage. Okay, so this part looks like I mean resembles the shape of number 8. So this is called as F8 configuration, and we can actually have the same kind of operation in the reverse way. That means set process will be appearing at a negative voltage and reset process will be appearing at a positive voltage. So this is called as a complementary F8 configuration. So it's just the opposite of the other one. So here we have to apply a positive voltage for the set process and negative voltage for the reset process, or the opposite. Okay, so essentially we need two different polarity of the voltages in order to complete a total switching operation. So that is why it is called as a bipolar resistive switching. For the volatile part, there are also two different types. So one is the threshold one. So here, what happens is that you can see that we have a positive threshold and we have a negative threshold. So essentially, if we follow this red line, then we can see that when the voltage is low, then it is in the off state, and then slowly current is increasing. And essentially, after we reach at a certain voltage, that is this threshold voltage VT plus, then it reaches the set state. And after staying there for certain time, if you reduce the voltage, then we reach at the hold voltage, okay, VH plus. and essentially that is kind of the memory part which happens here. So I mean, this is the cycle which gets followed here. And if we go to the negative threshold part, then it is the negative voltage. So here at a very high voltage, we get this threshold switching, and the hold voltage is slightly lower than that. So essentially, in the negative polarity, we can get a negative threshold resistive switching. So that is how this particular process it works here. And the next one is complementary resistive switching. So here what happens is that we have a slightly different geometry. So far what we have explained is that we have a metal layer and an insulating layer and another metallic layer. But here we have two metallic layer and we have three layers in between. Okay, so we have basically another metallic layer inside. So essentially we have two MIM or metal insulator metal structure which are sandwiched on top of each other. So we have two memristive element. So memristive, this term is coming from the sum of two terms, that is memory and resistance. Okay, since this is a resistance based memory, so that is why the term is memristive which is being used here. So here we have two memristive elements, so one is A and other is B. So essentially we have basically voltage that is being applied, and if we look at the way switching works here, so here let's say we are starting from a very low voltage and we are slowly increasing it, then the current is quite low, and then you can look at this cartoon inside. So here basically the current is increasing, means that there is only one of the memristive elements which are kind of like going to the set state, and as soon as we cross this VTH1, that is the threshold voltage 1, then we can see that either, let's say when we are starting, then we will go along this path. So here let's say the current is not increasing, which means that the complete filament formation has not happened. Okay, however, when we are here, that means both the memristive elements, or let's say the resistive switches, they are in the set state, which means that the current is quite high. So essentially, depending on how we are proceeding, so at VTH1 one of the layers will be switched, and in VTH2 another layer will be switched. So we will be having a kind of like high current between these two, and switching will happen at these two voltages. Now if we go to the reverse polarity, then here also the reverse of this thing will happen. That means we can get a high current between VTH3 and VTH4, and we will get a switching basically at VTH4 and VTH3. Okay, so that is how here this complementary resistive switching process works. So essentially we have two coupled resistive switches which are contributing towards the current, or let's say the memory operation here. Okay, so now there are several mechanisms which are into place here. So there are three prominent ones. So one is called as this electrochemical memory, then valence change memory, and thermochemical memory. And we'll look briefly into the details, like how does this thing works. So let's say the first one is called as electrochemical memory. So let's look at this IV curve here. For example, here you can see that this red line is followed by different arrows, and we'll see a quite large hysteresis in the positive voltage and a small hysteresis in the negative voltage counterpart. Okay, so here if we, let's say, start from point A, so you can see the current is quite low, almost zero current. And here the device which has been kind of like schematized here, it is a silver and platinum. These are the two electrodes, and some insulating material which is being put in between them, that is the golden color. So at a point here, basically there is no current which is being flown, or almost negligible current is being flown here, and that is why the resistance is quite high. Now if we go to point B, then we can see that there are these silver ions which are actually being migrated from the silver to the platinum, because there is certain voltage which is being applied to that. And if we keep on increasing, then at point C, you can see that platinum ions are also not platinum ions, basically the silver ions which have been migrated, they will be reaching at the platinum electrode, and as a result the current will start increasing. And if we reach at point D here, then we can see that this blue kind of balls, or let's say the silver ions, are forming a nice conduction path. This is a continuous channel, and that will help to have a very large current to flow in this device or across these two layers. So that is why the current will also increase quite large here. Now, if we reduce the voltage, then you can see beyond a certain voltage, the current will start going down. And when we will reach the point E, then basically this filament will break, because the voltage polarity is being reversed, which means that the silver ions, which are earlier moving to the platinum electrode, now they will move back to the silver electrode. Okay. So as a result, the filament which was in existence earlier will not be there anymore, and the resistance of the structure will increase, or essentially will reach a reset state. So this process is actually one can repeat it, and that's how one can get this memory effect in this process. Now, let us look at the second part, that is thermochemical memory. So here what happens is that we have, let's say again, a nickel electrode, and we have a silicon one. So this is not a metallic one in that way, but it's being used as a bottom electrode, and we have some oxide layer in between. So here it is the hafnium oxide. So this is a popular one in resistive switching. So now here, in the pristine state, you can see there are certain basically vacancies, which are oxygen vacancies, that are being present in the hafnium oxide layer. So these are these kind of orange circles. And if we increase the voltage, so then what will happen is that there will be metallic ions, which will be kind of like migrating through this hafnium oxide layer. And if we are going to the set state, that means we are at a slightly high voltage, then these ions will kind of form a continuous filament between the top and bottom electrode, and we will get a very high current here in this state. Compared to that, when it is in the reset state, you can see that this voltage is low. So here this filament will break down. So as a result, the resistance will increase. So the high resistance state will be essentially a disrupted filament state. Okay. So in the low resistance state, that is the set state, here you can see filament is present, but in the high resistance state, the filament is not there. So that is how this particular type of mechanism works. The next one here is valence change memory. So here also you can see there is a top and bottom electrode, and there are these oxygen vacancies which are present here. And essentially, whenever some voltage is being applied, these basically vacancies are being guided towards that particular electrode. And in the low resistance state, they will form a continuous filament, and in the high resistance state, this filament formation will be disrupted, because the vacancies will change the migration direction. Okay, so that is how one can basically switch between the set and reset state in order to achieve a resistive switching operation here. So these are the three prominent mechanisms which are commonly being observed in these resistive switching devices. Okay. Excuse me. So now if we look at the materials which are being used in the developing of these circuits over the years, so you can see starting from 1960s. So here basically mostly these binary oxides which are being used, that is silicon dioxide, alumina, etc. And then later perovskite oxides and basically manganites have come into picture. And in 2000, there are binary transition metal oxides have again taken the field, and because they are quite compatible with this CMOS technology, and people have started developing actual devices here. And then after that, again, complicated oxide materials have been used. And then later on, these binary metal oxides have been used quite actively in the industry. And from 2012 onwards, there are several 2D materials which are also being used into this. And now there are biological materials which are being tested to develop this thing. So you can see over the years, each decade, the technology is being developed, and the performance and operation, they are actually being kind of like used with time. So now, if we look at the existing resistive switching based materials, then currently there are these organic small molecule based materials which are being used. So again, this is something which is kind of like organic material. Then we have organic and inorganic hybrid materials which are being used. Then we have 2D hybrids which are being used, and then some polymer based materials are used, and biological materials which are also being used. So we will be talking mostly about these biological materials. But overall, if we look at the picture, we can see there is a quite a lot of presence of organic materials and polymers and biological materials. Okay, so the technology is moving towards a more sustainable solutions here. Okay, so now one simple question comes that okay, why biological materials are so much of interest here? So I explained a little bit into the earlier part. The main reason is that there are certain disadvantages with the conventional materials that or let's say advantages which are inherent with the some of these biological materials, that the optimization of materials is quite difficult if we, let's say, are talking about a complicated oxide material, because if we want to fabricate it, then we have to take care of a lot of kind of things. So the vacancy distribution is not proper. Then let's say the actual stoichiometry of the material is not up to the mark. So there are quite a lot of factors into the material processing which essentially disturbs the device performance. Okay, because here it is quite important. And moreover, they are costly because they use quite a lot of rare earth materials. Okay, and they are becoming lesser and lesser in volume in terms of availability. So it is becoming more costly also. And the major important point is that they are not environmentally friendly, and somehow the yield is also less. Okay, so biological materials have a good advantage in this part. Okay, so now let us look at what are these different biological based memory devices. So they have this advantage of less toxicity and eco-friendly. They are easy to synthesize and they are biocompatible, and they are easily degradable. Okay, so there are 4 major advantages which these materials have. So here are some of the waste materials which are biological in nature, and which actually can be used to make the same kind of circuits which I explained so far. So for example, the first one is orange peel. So we have oranges which we basically eat, of course. Now here, if we look at the basically cover here, and here certain basically protein molecules which are present, and they can be actually extracted, and this orange peel can be used to design a memory element. Then we have here where we have keratin that can actually be processed from here. Then we have silk protein, and next is let's say egg albumin, so that can also be taken away. Then we have from potato, there are certain extracts which can be taken out. Then we have lotus leaves that can also be used. So as you see that none of these materials are very much expensive, and they are kind of like available almost freely in some cases. So let us now go to some of the devices and see how do they actually used, are they used in memory storage application. So let's say when we are talking about the orange peel, so here if you wants to, let's say, do an experiment, then the first way to do is that we have to take out the orange peel, and then it has to be cleaned properly. So this means that all the chemical or basically, let's say, unwanted ingredients has to be taken care of, basically removed from here, and then it has to be cut into small pieces, and after certain processing and drying, these peels can be powdered. Okay, so essentially this will be very uniform powder, and this processing is quite important because essentially that will determine the quality of this material. And now from the powder, one can actually disperse it into some sort of solution like alcohol, and then this can be filtered. And the pectin, which is essentially the active ingredient here, that the pectin gel can be extracted from here, and it can be dried further, and pectin powder can be produced from here. And in the presence of some active solvent, the pectin solution can be made from here. Okay. And after that, basically one can actually deposit a thin film of this pectin. And let's say here this is a device where ITO, or let's say indium tin oxide, is used as a bottom electrode here, and then this orange part, which is the pectin film, is being coated here through spin coating. And on the top we have the silver electrodes, and they are patterned, and so you can see there are multiple of these electrodes which are being present here. So here the advantage is that we can actually deposit this pectin on any substrate. Okay, so for example, we can put it on a flexible substrate also. And so you can see this diagram here, that this is a flexible kind of like material on top of which there are different of these memory cells which have been patterned. So essentially, if we do that, then this will be a flexible memory or flexible electronic circuit. Okay, so it can be used for even like flexible display or anything. So that has a good advantage. Now here is an image of this SEM. So the scanning electron microscopy image. Okay, just give me 1 second. Here you can see that silver, pectin, and ITO, this structure. So if we look at from the side, that you can see that these materials can be visible quite clearly here. Okay, so they have clear interfaces. Now, if we want to check or measure the performance of this device, then what you have to do is that we have to connect it to a source meter very simply. And if we do that, then we can actually measure the IV curve here. So this is the data which have been taken from one paper which is published in 2018. So here you can see for this particular device we have silver electrode, then we have the orange this pectin here, and there's a ITO which is the bottom electrode. And in the basically IV sweeping, you can see there is a set operation, and so current is increasing quite high, and it is going up to almost like 10 milliamp. And in the reset process, it is kind of giving a slightly lower current. And if this IV sweep is being repeated over a number of cycles, so for example here this process has been repeated up to 100 cycles, and you can see this particular shape of the IV is actually staying almost similar over the course of these 100 cycles. So this tells us that the device has a reproducible operation, which is quite important if you want to make a practical, let's say, prototype device for a operation. So here up to 100 cycles, we see that there is no deviation from the behavior. Now, if we kind of systematically evaluate this performance, then here you can see that so this is taken from this paper in small, that so this is called as a kind of endurance plot or investigation of endurance performance. So here we have basically the high res. So the way it is being done is that so you can actually look at this graph. So here the device is being switched between set and reset states. So either let's say this one and this one. Okay, so constantly it is kind of measured at two different voltages, and it is being switched between these two. So if we do that way, basically either we are switching between high resistance state and low resistance state over a number of cycles. So you will get a distribution of these 2 points. So that is how you can see these black points. They are coming from the high resistance state, and these red points are from low resistance states. Okay, so here it is being done for 500 repeated cycles, and you can see there is a distribution, but the distribution of these HRS and LRS, they are coming within a certain window. So there is a clear gap between these two kind of resistance states, which tells us that this has a reliable kind of like switching operation, or let's say we can very effectively differentiate between the high resistance states and low resistance states. So let's say if we want to do like a 1 and 0 operation, so we can define this is the 1 state and this is the 0 state. Okay. And here basically the distribution of V set and V reset, that means the operational voltage, that also is quite well defined. So here it is coming between 0 to minus 0.5, and here it is coming around 1. So that also tells us that what will be the actual applied voltage where the set and reset states are being formed. So this tells us that these devices have a very reliable and reproducible operation over a large number of cycles. So the endurance behavior is quite good. Now, if we want to know the non-volatile nature of the memory, or let's say the device, then here you can see that some read and write operation are being done, and you can see with time. So up to 1000 seconds, these measurements are done. So you can see these pink circles where basically read was done at 0.5, and I think this is this level is not correct. Probably this will be kind of like at a different voltage. So here basically you can also see that this is quite stable also, both these lines. So this pink and this green line, they're quite stable over a large amount of time. Okay, so that is kind of like the retention behavior of this device, and it tells us that the retentivity is also quite good for this kind of like orange peel based this RM device. Now, if we want to know what is the mechanism of resistive switching here in this case, then what we see here is that, so here are basically certain kind of like IV curves which are being plotted, and the corresponding vacancy distribution of the devices are being shown at the bottom. So in figure A, you can see when this is the red line, that is the condition of the current voltage. So here we have, let's say, the positive voltage is being applied to the top electrode, so current is kind of like, so voltage is being increased here, and as a result basically there are this oxygen vacancy and also silver ions which are kind of doing some sort of migration here. Now as soon as it starts the filament formation, so here you can see all these vacancies and silver ions which are kind of randomly positioned earlier, they are kind of being aligned into one particular common path, and that allows a high amount of current to flow through, and it is the set process. And when basically we are kind of like reversing the voltage, then again the reverse of this thing will happen, and we can reach the low resistance state in this process. So here actually you can see that in the low resistance state, again the basically, or the reset state, these silver ions and the oxygen vacancies will kind of be randomized, and essentially when we are reaching this particular red line, then there will be no active filament which is present between the electrodes. So as a result, the current will be quite low. So the mechanism, as you see, is again the filament formation and rupture, but the active ingredient is slightly different in different cases here. So now next, if we want to look at the charge transport mechanism, that means what are the mechanism that is being involved here. So here you can see that let's say in the positive voltage regime. So here there is a fit which has been made here. So the slope is close to 1. So this is almost a linear kind of increase here. And then when the voltage is being reversed, then the slope is of the order of 2. Okay, so this is a similar kind of, not exactly similar, but let's say a power law kind of behavior is also being observed in the negative voltage regime. So essentially the mechanism is space charge limited conduction. So here you will see basically 3 different contributions. So one is ohmic, then we will have a basically kind of trap based assisted tunneling, and then you have a steep increase. So there are 3 different components which are present here. So that is basically the space charge limited conduction. That is the general term which is being used here. And that can be used to explain the role of different electrodes and contacts, and one can actually optimize this device geometry by actually choosing what will be a good active electrode material, etc. And that way the kind of distribution of set and reset voltages can also be improved. Okay, so next here basically this group has tested the flexibility of this device So here you can see there are two different curves. One is this blue points and one is the red point. So here one configuration is the flat configuration where no external disturbance has been made, and you can see that you can clearly see a bipolar kind of switching. And in these red points that represent the bending configurations, which means the device has been kind of like bent. Okay, so there is some mechanical stress has been applied. However, you can see that the IV curve does not change the shape, and you can say more or less it is following the same path, of course, also. Okay, so here it says that in the flat and in high bending deformation, the IV curves do not change much. So that is a very good quality actually, which means that the behavior which you are observing is undisturbed, or let's say it is intrinsic to the particular system. And here actually you can see the distribution of, or let's say the variation of the resistance states and the voltages. So they also do not change much with different bending numbers. So yeah, here you can see like that these numbers are basically almost staying at the same level, both in the high and low resistance states. As soon as we do the bending number. So here the bending number means that here we have like they have bent and then they release, then bent again release. So here you can see 10 to the power 4 bent. So that is kind of like 10,000. Okay, which is quite a large number. So if a device, and these are like lab-based devices, right? So if they are sustainable even after 10,000 bending, that means that it is very well reliable and reproducible kind of performance. Okay, so now here actually an experiment was done to know the biodegradability of the devices. So here what they have done is that they have actually kind of like dissolved, or let's say put these devices. So you can see there are these multiple dots which are the devices. They have put it into DI water solution. And just to see that how does this thing look like. So you can see from 0 minute when they have first started, there are multiple devices which are visible. Then 2 minute, some of these devices which are at the corner, they are kind of like being washed away. With 4 minutes, you can see a lot more are there, and then 6, 8, and within 10 minutes, you can see essentially all the devices are being washed away. So it essentially tells that within 10 minutes, essentially, we are getting rid of the entire active material. So biodegradability is not a problem, which is essentially the problem for inorganic materials, or let's say other compact like plastics and everything. So like they do not degrade over the years. Okay, like hundreds and thousands of years, they do not degrade naturally. But here within 10 minutes, and even with just DI water solution, these devices can be essentially degraded or erased, and essentially they are kind of like completely kind of without making any environmental impact, they can be just completely removed. Let's say once we are done with the operation, so let's say we have measured it, like let's say we have some device which we have used for let's say 2 years or 3 years, and after that what we usually have to do is that we have to throw away, right? But here essentially if we just put it for 10 minutes into some solution, this thing will be done. And then other components like let's say this ITO substrate can be used for making another device. Okay, so that is a good thing. Now here there is a second type of material, so that is the lotus leaf. So one can actually also use this for making such kind of RM devices. So the step here involves like first you have to collect these lotus leaves from the pond or lake, and then you have to clean it properly in distilled water, etc. And then one can actually dry it at oven, in the oven at 50 degrees Celsius. Then you use a crusher and you filter, and then basically you will get this lotus leaf powder. And after that one have to do a little bit of device preparation. So this powder have to be mixed with this 2-methyl pyridine, and then once they are done, basically you can actually spin coat it on top of ITO, and then you have to do dry it at a moderate temperature. So you cannot go at too high temperature, because then actually there might be like some more degradation. And then in a similar manner, what we said earlier, that we can actually deposit top electrodes with using a mask. Okay, so here this ACM image actually shows that there is the bottom electrode, then we have the film and the top electrode. So you can clearly see these 3 layers here. Now here you can see the IV characteristics of the device. So here again a clear kind of like hysteresis curve is being visible, and there are multiple kind of like paths, like steps which have been marked, like 1, 2, 3, 4. And if we reproduce this cycling multiple times, then you can see there are these different branches which are kind of following up on top of each other, which tells us that the behavior is quite reproducible, which means that the set and reset operations are happening at almost at identical voltages and currents. So here this is done over 100 cycles, and here the performance have been measured. So here you can see that again the endurance kind of test, so which is being done. So here the red dots are measured in the high resistance state, and this low resistance state are measured basically these black dots, and there is a clear separation between these two. So this is, you can say it as like an on-off ratio. Okay, so and at the bottom actually you can also see, I think this is a function of time which have been measured, and over like 10 to the power 3 seconds or more, you can see a clear separation, but here a slight degradation is happening on the basically high resistance state here. Okay, so that can be improved with material processing, but essentially you can see that up to 10 to the power 3 cycles there is a clear kind of switching operation which is being reproduced. And there actually the effect of temperature have been studied. So here you can see that even if it is heated at 40 degrees Celsius, the memory effect is still sustaining. So why the heating effect is important? Because sometimes you have probably seen that in a computer it gets quite hot. Okay, so that is why this 40 degrees Celsius is kind of a temperature which is being kind of like a let's say support temperature, or let's say reference temperature, which have been used to check the performance of this device. Now here the resistive switching mechanism can be explained through this cartoon. So here we have the silver and ITO electrodes, and there are 3 things like the silver ions, then oxygen vacancies, and in different parts of this graph. So you can see like basically these ions and oxygen vacancies, they will kind of align and realign essentially. So in the set state, you can see that there is a continuum filament which have been formed, and there is a filament brokerage which is happening here. So again the filament formation, so essentially the filament formation and filament breaking that is happening, and that way the system is switching between the conductive path and say the resistive part. Okay, so that is the switching mechanism which we have explained earlier also. And here the charge transport mechanism can also be explained in a similar manner what we did earlier. So here actually you can see in the negative voltage region and in the positive voltage region, if we do a fitting, then here you can see that the slope of the IV curve is close to 1. So this means that it's a linear or ohmic kind of charge operation here. However, if we go to slightly higher voltage, then the slope gets increased to higher value of 1. So this is like 1.6. This is slightly non-linear. And here in the positive cycle, you can see that up to a small like certain voltage, the slope is 1. But once the voltage is actually going above this number, then the slope increases abruptly. So that is the abrupt voltage in a current increase, which I explained. So again, it is a part of space charge limited conduction. And that way, this is the mechanism which is dominant here also in this particular device. Okay, so now here they have also tested the effect of top electrode. So earlier the results are done with silver electrode, but here they have checked it with copper and aluminum electrode. And here you can see that with the presence of copper, the shape of, or let's say the size of the hysteresis loop is quite large. However, in the presence of aluminum, the size is getting reduced slightly, but the current does not change much. So here it was like maximum is 9 nanoampere, and here it is of the order of 6 nanoampere. So it is not changing by that much number. But in order to check which electrode is giving the better performance, one can actually do this kind of systematic comparison with different kind of electrode materials in that way. Okay, so yeah, so with that I am coming to the end of this presentation. So the conclusions are the following. So here we have seen that there are different organic, or let's say biological materials which are conventionally treated as biological waste, and they are naturally occurring, and they can be used to design different organic electronic components, and which can open up to design different electronic components which are sustainable, and let's say they will offer biodegradability and then biocompatibility, etc. And they can be useful for various fields also. And next is that biocomposite materials, they can actually provide an excellent choice for future applications in organic electronics. Now, some of these materials, they offer unique optical and electrical properties. For example, nanoparticles can be created, and their size can be controlled, and the properties will essentially be kind of like related to their sizes. And as a result, these bioelectronic devices or their properties will also be tuned by this process. So essentially, one can actually engineer by this optimization process to design different bioelectronic features. And this biomaterial system, it can be used in different fields. So here we have explained this resistive memory, but one can also use it for flash memory, then biotechnology, then biosensor design, and biofuel production, artificial organ, artificial synapse design, etc. And it is believed that this functional device made with these materials, I mean, these are kind of a promising candidate, and if they can be handled properly, so they can actually be useful for next generation electronic circuit development. So that way, overall, the economic value of the materials can help in reducing the production cost, and also it offers sustainability. Okay, so with that, I would like to finish here. And so here is the acknowledgement. So these are the students which have actually worked on this project. So these are all our PhD students. So this is Karuna, and this is Santanu, and Orpita, and this is Dimple. And here are few papers in last year which we have actually published. So there are a few more there. And if anyone is interested, then actually you can have a look, and maybe you can communicate with me also. So yeah, so thank you for your time. Now it's time for questions.
Thank you, Dr. J, for such a warm start filled with shared knowledge, providing us in-depth detail of the bio-waste for energy-efficient memory design. Now, I would request participants to put forward their query so that certain Shweta Kulshest, yes. I would request ma'am to enable mic for the attendees.
I already did it.
Yes, Shweta,
Hello.
please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you for giving me. Very nice presentation, sir. It is very nicely presented, and I enhance my knowledge regarding the development of devices from wastage like orange peel and lotus leaves. It is very exciting to know about this. So I have just one query regarding what is the criteria of selection of any waste for developing such type of devices? On what basis you selected orange peels and lotus leaves? Because if I am assuming they are citrus, they are aquatic wheat, so there is a lot of difference. So what is the criteria of selection of this bio waste?
Okay, very good question actually. So see, one of course would be let's say in a trial and kind of test basis. Okay, so for example, this citrus or lemon peel, you said that is actually something which we have also kind of like tried little bit. So that is one kind of, so you essentially see, unless you are doing a measurement or preparing the systems, you will never know. Although it is kind of theoretically, or let's say one can predict that, okay, this material can probably be good for this and this functionality or that and that. But essentially, unless you are measuring, you will never know that whether it is useful or not. So that is the first point. Now, of course, you cannot go on and work with any materials. So you can think of certain materials, let's say, which can have a better lifetime. So in terms of like environmental sustainability, so you can think of like which materials have a higher chance of degradation and which materials can have a, let's say, a much lesser chance of degradation in different atmosphere. Okay, for example, let's say when I'm talking about lotus leaf, then you know like lotus leaf are kept on open atmosphere under sun and water for like a long period of time, right? So they are kind of quite environmentally sustainable. So if you think of that way, you have to think of the sustainability part, like whether the material is strong enough to sustain, let's say, different conditions like temperature and humidity and things like that. So that is one point. And second is, let's say, the purity of the material. Okay, so because as I said that this is a problem with the inorganic materials, specifically when you are dealing with this kind of memory element design. So commonly, let's say hafnium oxide is a very popular material which is industrially also used for this kind of design. But the main problem is that even you see in hafnium oxide, you have only hafnium and oxygen. Okay, so this is a very simple kind of structure, right? And HFO2. So what problem can be there? You put oxygen, you put hafnium, and it will, I mean, form hafnium oxide. So that is kind of like the most stable configuration. But even in this case, people have seen that just changing the very minute growth conditions will result in drastic change in performance of the devices that are being grown. So for example, the vacancy distribution, they depend a lot on the growth condition. For example, at what temperature you are annealing or at what is the background pressure, etc. Okay. Now this problem is not that much prominent with these biological materials because they are naturally grown, right? So it's because they're naturally forming, so there is very limited like human intervention there. So you have that advantage here. And now the only thing which we have to look at here, how pure they are. For example, there should be less amount of like, you know, like a toxic presence there, or let's say when you are kind of like trying to deal with these materials, it can be cleaned properly, things like that. Okay, so that is another factor which you have to take into account. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say,
what type of cleaning solution you used?
So here actually kind of like these are okay. I don't have the detail. My students actually they can say in details because but typically these are like DI water, and then sometimes these are like some organic solvents which are being used. Okay.
Okay.
So I mean these are kind of like for different materials, the recipe is slightly different, but mostly these are like organic solvents which are not too much kind of like harmful for these materials because they are organic, right? So they can dissolve very easily in the presence of some of the solvents. Yes.
Yeah, sir, I have a few more queries. I will contact you on your mail ID regarding my queries. And I'm Dr. Shweta Kumsish from MIT University, Rajasthan, Jaipur.
Okay.
And it was very wonderful to hear your lecture and talk to you. It was very wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Any other question or any query? Yes, Rishi, you want to ask something? Hello, Rishi.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Jai Hind, sir. This is very good session and make us very informative about the use of natural wastes. But I want to ask one thing, that is there any chance of the microbial infection on these devices that we made?
See,
I mean, we are using biological materials, then so microbes are there in the air and water, different areas are there. Is there any chance on the infection or of the spreading of these microbes on that devices?
Okay. Okay, so it's basically a very nice actually input. See, essentially what we are doing is that we are trying to look at, let's say, the electronic operation of these things. Okay, so the infection will mostly occur if we are using them in our body. So if they are coming in contact with our human body in some form, let's say in our skin, or let's say if we are swallowing something like that. Let's say if I'm making a tablet. Okay, so then this
No,
chance
sir,
of
I am asking basically about the saprophytes,
right? Okay, but the point is that
which grow on the dead and decay material. They can grow on that
right,
devices.
right. Okay, so essentially, see, whenever like these devices will be made, they will be quite well encapsulated, right? So even if they're there, then basically the chances of getting any kind of like contamination will be very low there. Okay. So, or essentially, you can also think of in that way that these devices will have a certain lifetime, right? Okay. So,
Okay.
so after the lifetime, there will be a safety guideline or something like that. If in these things can come up. Hello.
Mean there should be a regular monitoring of these devices, because when we give so much input in that, and if this destroys due to contamination, that it is not useful.
Okay, I'm getting.
Okay, thank you, sir. I understand what you say. Any other else is saying or
I'm
mic
sorry.
on their
I'm
business?
getting some voice in the background. I'm not hearing.
Hello. Hello. Participants, please mute
Hello.
yourself. Hello, Dr. Sound.
Yes.
It was really a great talk, but I would like to add something or ask. You can say that the binder which you are using is of the pyrrolidone family, is it?
Right.
So we are also working on the, some of the devices. So we use PVP usually.
Okay.
So can you just tell me something more that what other binder we can use for fixing the
See,
material over the ITO?
Again, we like we have recently started working on this. So like 2 or 3
Okay.
materials we have tried and tested. So maybe in another few
Okay.
months we'll be able. So I mean, so far we are working with inorganic materials, and
Okay.
let's say in past let's say 6 months we have kind of started. So we are like we have got devices and everything, but we are still not in that stage that where we can actively comment on
Okay.
this.
Okay.
So
No.
maybe in another few months I'll be able to comment more
Sure,
on this.
sure, sure. I'll be in touch.
Yeah. So
Very
there are
nice
two
talk.
PhD students which are working, and then hopefully we'll
Yeah.
have some results in another few months. So because of
Actually,
actually
such.
COVID and everything, things
Yeah,
kind of
I
got
know, I
delayed.
know, I know. Actually, it all happened. This is real technology development in the area of the, yes,
Yes,
bioenergy.
yes.
So I again thank you for accepting our invitation and delivering a talk in this meeting. So thank you very much. I hope you have shared your PPT with me or not. I don't remember.
No, I have not shared. Well,
Please kindly do it because I will have to send to them because tomorrow I have to take the examination based on that content.
okay, no problem. I'll just share it with you.
Please kindly do
Okay,
it.
okay.
Okay then. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you. Okay, participants. Many of you have not muted yourself. So it is requested to all of you that when we are disabling or enabling your mic, to be very careful that you mute yourself. Otherwise, lot of disturbance and background noise distracts everyone, and it is not good for our ongoing program also. So now we have a tea break time, and we'll again meet at 12 noon. Okay? Anybody wanted to ask anything to me? Hello? I have enabled your mic. You can speak if you wish. If you don't have any query, we'll meet at 12 noon and we will start the lab session today. So be prepared to learn the techniques.
Ma'am,
How you
one
can-
question I
Yes,
have.
yes,
I have one
Rishi.
question.
Yes, Rishi.
Ma'am, in that assessment, whatever you have given, will give tomorrow, then how many questions and how much time you will give?
Don't worry, we'll give sufficient time and questions will be conceptual. I think all of you can do those questions. Nothing to worry. It is just to make that whether you have reached to that platform to understand the subject so that you can either teach or you can start your laboratory independently. And if you wish, I will be there to help you all in future also. Okay, Rishi?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, okay. Okay,
Thank you,
Sandan.
ma'am.
Okay, most welcome. We'll be meeting at 12 noon, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, bye.